Welcome. This is David Boles, Human Meme. Today's topic, Moose Turd Pie. We are made of the histories of the stories that have been told about us. A funny story is always more effective than a story intended to terrorize the listener. And fact is, most funny stories are pretty scary stuff. And our laughter covers our screams. Folklore in America is one of storytelling. And folklore is a dying art. Sure, we may try to look back to what was and celebrate it. But folk music and folk values and a folk belief system that laborers and workers are the real rulers of the world is not just dying, it's dead and gone. And folklore has it that since once the death of the old god was failed to be replaced by science and technology, according to playwright Eugene O'Neill in 1921, we lost our way as a nation. We no longer share stories or live in this world together. We are just set apart, with nothing to believe in, not even each other. And so we are purposefully set adrift. And we are set amiss in a world that cares not to carry us. Folk stories and folk songs bound us together against our heathen nature. And that effort demonstrated a greater willfulness for overcoming the hurdles and the dispassionate inequality that was once the old American West. And in this modernization of our lives and the world around us, we stopped being explorers, pioneers, and we became drifters. Drifters who did not want to implore the new world. We only wanted to take naps and watch television and wait for the end to come nigh upon us. And because of that lack of interest, our local and international folklorists are dead and dying. Bob Dylan is a folklore survivor, though he doesn't seem to care much for it anymore. Peter, Paul, and Mary pretty much are ended and done. Pete Seeger, great legacy, but will anyone care to listen to his banjo 20 years from now? And now we come upon Utah Phillips. Great storyteller, great folklorist. He dedicated his life to the people. And Utah claimed not to want the blood money of the rich, while performing and recording for what he claimed was pure posterity. Utah Phillips would not let Johnny Cash sing his songs because Johnny Cash was big time, big business, big money, big success. And Utah Phillips didn't want any part of that. He didn't want blood from that particular stone, even if it meant enriching him and getting him money for his political causes. Well, Utah Phillips has a lovely story about Moose Turd Pie, and it's become a classic over the years. And you should know it now and forever, and you should share it on and on and on. Preserve the folklore storytelling style. And I'll share with you now one of his recordings of that moose turd pie story right now. Utah told many versions of moose turd pie. And he always said many times he wanted his work freely shared, without any exchange of money. He only wanted unification of purpose for laborers, for the people who did the real work in the world. And so, in the spirit of that moment, I now present to you Utah Phillips and his moose turd pie, in a celebration of what was meant to be, and what never was to shall be again.
And I've always pleased me when somebody asks for the true stories, because they're so much more interesting and sometimes funnier than the phony made-up stuff. I never worked very much for the railroad. I've ridden the Western freight trains a good bit of my life, but I never worked for the railroad except but that one time. It was for the old Salt Lake San Pedro Railroad, out there by the old Mormon Muddy Mission south of Lost Wages, Nevada. It's the job of gandy dancing. Gandy dancing takes its name from the Gandy Shovel Company of Chicago. Right here, they made those long-handled shovels that the Irish laborers used to work on the roadbed. The Irish worker would take the wide end of the shovel when he could find it, and you'll notice my discourse is littered with small language tests to ensure that we are welded together as a solid unit. He would jam the shovel in underneath the rail or tie and then get out on the long handle and dance a jig step to lever the tie up to push the dunnage in the gravel to level the roadbed so the train wouldn't fall off as it went by, which was just a big drag for everybody. Now, they don't gandy like that anymore. Nowadays, modern times, they build a hole, a sidetrack. You don't want to interrupt the main, and you're going to be out there sometimes for a month, 3-4 weeks. And so you put the work train in the hole, and there's going to be 3 cars there. There's going to be these tool car, and then there's going to be bunk cars with bunks 18 inches apart. You're stuffed in there like sardines, and then a cook car, all right? And with an old oil stove or a wood stove. But this was the Salt Lake San Pedro Railroad, and they were cheap. The only thing, they had everything you needed, except one thing: they didn't have a cook. The rule was that they would wait for some greenhorn to start to bitch and piss and whine and moan about the cooking. They'd say, okay, you think you can do better, you get to be the cook. Well, that was me, see? Alligator mouth. But that was the worst cooking I ever had in my life. There was dog bottom pie and pheasant sweat. That was worse than the worst Unitarian church potluck supper cooking I ever had. Don't get me wrong, I've been a Unitarian most of my life. I think, how do you know if you're a Unitarian? I don't know. How do you know? There's no psychic scars as with the Baltimore Catechism. And there's no identifying marks as with Jewish males. Maybe if you drink a lot of coffee and run a mimeograph, you're a Unitarian. I don't know. I ran a committee for the Unitarian Universalists for years. I did, yeah. It was called the Send a Poor Unitarian Kid to Camp, if you can find one, committee. Yeah, I wrote liberal folk songs. I wrote liberal folk songs for the Unitarian hymnals back in the days of the ubiquitous church coffee house. Remember the ones in the basement with the little red lamps? And during the folk music revival, the liberal clergy seized every opportunity to translate dogma into hip rhetoric. Does that sound cynical? Probably not. Where was I? Yeah, I wrote songs like, I'm going down the road feeling, I'm going down the road feeling, I'm going down the road feeling, I probably shouldn't be treated this way for living, I talk, we would rather not be moved. I thought, oh, which side am I on? Which side am I on? Either here or there. The reason I left Utah because the damn Unitarians burned a question mark on my front lawn. Where was I? I didn't want to cook for that bunch of grimy grifters, you see. But I knew if anybody complained about my cooking, they were going to have to cook. Armed with that knowledge, I sallied forth over the muddy river. I was stomping around in the cheat grass and the bunch grass, foraging for grub, and there, nestled at my feet in all of its pristine grandeur, was an enormous moose turd. I mean, it was a real steamer. I looked down at that pasture pastry and I said to myself, Self, I'm going to make up a big moose turd pie. Because if anybody complains about my cooking, they're going to have to cook. Well, I tipped that meadow wafer up on edge, and I rolled it like a wagon wheel down to the cook car, leaned it up against the sides like a big pizza, clambered up into the car, and I baked up a whale of a big pie shell. And I baked that moose turd into it slick as you please. I crimped the edges with my thumbs, laid strips of dough across the top like they do, garnished it with some parsley and paprika, and it was poetry on a plate. I served it for dessert, waiting for the first hint of a complaint. Well, a big giant dude about 5'40" stumbled in, threw himself down like a fool on the stool, picked up a fork, and took a big bite of that moose turd pie. Well, he threw down his fork and he let out a bell and he screamed, "My God, that's moose turd pie." It's good, though.
Thank you for listening. Be a human meme.